Before you start any using non-sanctified that the spirit that was now the incarnate, you raised up the vibration of all of us spirits here and the spirits of the universe. So I ask some of the brethren come and help me sanctify it right here. Please. When I my Lord, that I choose. Deep in the pride. On the see from inside his arms. Amen. Thank you for coming, and I want to give thanks for the bishop
from Little Daniel Faith for taking the lead as he entered, and from members of Mount Pisgah and other Chinese shelters who have joined with us from the Spiritual Baptist community to be with us here today. I will now invite my beloved head of the Department of Cultural Studies, but also daughter of Yemaya in her own right, to do our opening rituals and say opening words.
Go here because my voice doesn't always travel. Blessed morning. There are many crowned heads in this room, and so I honor the presence of all those whose ancestral spirits have guided them to this land, to this space, to this sanctuary that we are gathered here today. I will open with song from my Congo line and Yoruba line. I'm a Madre Ntisi of the Palo Monte tradition, a Bantu tradition from the Congo. I'm a Kumina practitioner. I'm also a Iyalosha Santera of the Lukumi tradition. I have my daughter Omo Yansan Hekwaye Oya. And to all of those to Legba, Eshu, Elegua. Within my tradition, we open with Elegua first. And so we hold space and as the pathfinder, as the opener. But I'm going to open with the ancestors since they're the ones who called us to convene here. Congo Guinea son. Buena noche, frío yo. Congo Guinea son. Buena noche, frío yo. Yo dejo mi hueso allá. Vengo para hacer caridad. Yo dejo mi hueso allá. Vengo para hacer caridad. Essentially, that's saying that I am from the Congo. I've left my bones in Africa, but I've come here to do the work that I've been divinely sent to do. Barasuayo, Omoliana wana mama kenira wo. Barasuayo, Omoliana wana mama kenira wo. O barasuayo. Shudara. Omoliana wana mama kenira wo. Ago achumero. Ago achumero. Baralaiki. Ago achumero. Ache moyuba horisha, moyuba horisha, ache moyuba horisha, moyuba horisha, ache moyuba horisha, ibarako moyuba, ibarako moyubara. Ele moneco, si barako, como riubara, ele guachuna, y chonchona be, odara, como lireo, baba semi, y chonchona be, eshuo, ele guae, eshuo, ele guae. Ele como puribale, ele guapo, eshuo, ele guae, eshuo, ele guae, ele como puribale, ele guapo, Abu King King, Abu King King, Abu King King, Abu King King, Laro ye, Laro ye, Laro yo, Abu King King, Abu King King,
Thank you very much. And now I will invite the principal of the college to welcome you to this space, Principal Clark. He said,
it is indeed really and truly a joy and a privilege to welcome all of you this morning. I welcome in the realm of academia, my beloved Dr. Yehum, who has been with me, and we have been working together to make sure that this and other things will take place. This is one of the initial works that we are intending to do, to be able to lift up the legacy, lift up the heritage, to re-examine, to re-explore our traditions, our journeys. But there are several journeys, and we really live in a very interesting time at this moment. A time in which we are beginning to challenge most of the accepted concepts, ideas, what we have come to call norms. We are challenging the overlays, the things that might have suppressed us over the years, the things that might have dampened our spirits, the things that might have said to us that we are not where we are, and for us to discern what it means to be. There's much work that is being undertaken at this time as we challenge all that has been the acceptable over the years. As I was preparing for being with us today, and I must, at this point in time, ask you to remember our seminarians who you may see going around the place. They have a lot of work to do because tomorrow is our commemoration day. And as a result, somebody's listening as well. As a result, they may not be physically here with us, but they would have spent last night from 6 o'clock in the evening doing 1 hour watch sessions, holding this space for this gathering this morning. So I want you to just remember them as we give them thanks for their contribution to all that is taking place in this space this day. You know, for many years we have heard much about emancipating ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds, the very famous lines. And we as a group of persons have focused a lot on what it means to be emancipated. And I don't think that even as we reflected on that we would have been expecting the kind of activity and the kind of challenge that is going on in Europe and other places as they're being challenged to deal with the sin, as it were, of enslavement. And this is something that I don't think that we in our time were expected to see, but it is here. And various institutions are being challenged to re-examine the role that they would have played within this whole horrible aspect of the human history. We here at Codrington College, we hold a very tense place, as it were, because the mandate for this institution was to be able to do good to men's souls while taking care of their bodies. It's a very strange concept that our benefactor offered. By no means an abolitionist, but yet in some respect, someone who was challenged by what was taking place. This institution has been around for some 276 years. Its intention was to be able to train persons to go off into the mission field, what was understood as the mission field in those days, because you have to remember the mindset of what was going on. It has instead been the center for the education of many of our Caribbean leaders, as it was the first tertiary institution in the Caribbean. And so many of those who would have benefited from the classics would have been educated here. We still have a community here residing around the college who can perhaps date their ancestry way back. Many of them have, their families have never left the plantation, as it were. So there's a lot that is taking place in our time as we are being asked to look at this history of ours. And we felt it's important for Codrington College because we are so central to all that has taken place, that it is important for us to be a very active part of all that needs to be undertaken at this time. We are responsible for training persons in ministry. And how do we train them going forward? How do we help them to help our people to liberate themselves and to be aware and conscious of their own self-identity? So this morning for me is a very exciting time, and I look forward to what can take place out of this wonderful small gathering that we have started here. And we look forward to more occasions such as this. And I really want to truly welcome you and to let you know that you are truly welcome. And we trust that we can continue our journey together as we learn from each other and as we grow together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenyon. Reverend Dr. Michael Clark. Oops. So I'm going to put on another hat as I stand as, thank you, as head of Department of Cultural Studies at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, and a warm welcome to each of you who are present. As Dr. Canon, Reverend Dr. Michael Clark brought to us, this conversation around how do we bring the various worlds of sacred worlds that we have here in Barbados together began around the period of COVID. It began in 2020. And we were trying to find a time that would be appropriate. And every time it just seemed like the pandemic was weighing heavily and extending, but it gave us time to kind of think about what kind of gathering we would wish to have. And in actual fact, the idea of doing it virtual, which was its initial inception, didn't sit well with either of us because we knew that there was something drawing us to this land, that it wasn't just about a gathering for people to chime in on and to link in on virtually, but also to touch this land, to have their presence on this land. because the land carries power. And many of our traditions within the African diaspora, we understand that the natural environment holds within its leaves, within its stones, its rocks, within its flowers, within its herbs. It holds the medicine, it holds the teaching, and it holds wisdom. And it's about going to these sites and recognizing that these are the set sites that our ancestors have toiled in. So it's not enough to speak of their presence and not be on the spaces or in the spaces of which they toiled, of which they lived, of which they were able to enact moments of joy, and of which they perished, and of which they are buried. And this is sacred land. And we know in the period of enslavement, we weren't always aware of where ancestors were deposited. And that's why libations are poured, why we may see even in a rum shop, a man or a woman before taking their first drink offer, because they know someone has come before them. And that is what it does. It allows for an opening, a portal of conversation, of a potential union. But more than that, it offers a recognition that I do not stand alone, I do not walk alone, and I come from someone and somewhere. And I'm paying homage in that moment to all those who've come before me. And so in having this conversation today in this panel, again, it's one of many that we're looking forward to having. But we chose to honor the spiritual Baptist tradition here in Barbados because it is one of the indigenous, local, homegrown, if we will, practices that fuse the realities of an African spiritual practice and a Christian ethic, and bringing them together to make sense of one another. And we could just imagine what our ancestors had to do in terms of recognizing that their gods were being the challenge of maintaining that within a space that wasn't honoring that. And the ability, you know, when I was thinking about where do I wish to share, and I'm going back and thinking about Orlando, the great Jamaican sociologist's work, Slavery as Social Death, and the idea of the ways in which the very structure, the very infrastructure, the very mechanism, institution of slavery denied a certain sense of the ability of Africans to be in the fullness of who they were, a kind of social death. I had a challenge with that because I recognize that it is in the space of our religiosities, in the plural, it's in the space of our spiritual practice that our agentive potentials were realized. It was in the space of how do we make sense of this world that no longer makes sense. I came from a comparative religion background as my first degree, and one of my professors spoke of religion as in the concept of sacred worlds, and the idea that we are in the process of world making as we are in self-making. And the idea of the divine universe is the sense that every culture, every people construct a world to make sense of themselves, to make sense of how they move in that world. I see we have a Sangoma priestess in the room. We have elders from different traditions who hold on to those practices and who recognize those presences that are part of our reality. And so when we were putting together this gathering and thinking with my colleague here, Shepherd John Hunt, Dr. John Hunt, and thinking about what do we want to do, he came up with the term Afrocentric, right? And I was recognizing that within certain circles, that very concept is essentialist, right? In hearing the very term Afrocentric, there's a ideology, if you will, of exclusivity, that it's only about Africa. And it's not, because when we think about African systems of thought, African wisdom systems, African philosophies, at their very heart is an inclusivist mandate. They recognize that the sacred is exponential, And so there wasn't an exclusive way in which they understood the divine. So when Christ was offered as prophet, as God, they recognized, okay, we see something in this, and we could take this too and still recognize that Olodumare, Eshu Lekbara, Yemaya, Oya Yansan, Olokun, Oshun, Chango Kabiosili, all also had a presence. We also recognize that Papa Legba, Izili Danto, Izili Freda, Ezile Geruj, Ogun also had a presence, right? And so when we look at these spaces in the Caribbean, we recognize that it does us a disservice to only think of religion and spirituality in a singular modality, because our African ancestors never thought that way. They had a much broader sensibility, a much more expansive sensibility of how to navigate this very hostile terrain and territory and existence that wasn't of their own choosing, but one in which they found themselves. And so when we think about, some of the ideas that have been central to the Caribbean intellectual tradition, for example, and we recognize for, thinkers who were trying to make sense of how do we make sense of this world. Part of the narrative of the study of religion, of Caribbean religions, was centered in part by the narrative of retention. And anyone who's studied with me will probably be able to call off some of those names of the retentionist school or the continuity school. So the kind of bedrock of New World, quote unquote, Africanisms, a la Melville Herskovits, and those who follow that trajectory of thought. The great Trinidadian linguist Mervyn Aline, in his Roots of Jamaican Culture, follows along that retentionist line. And even Kamal Brathwaite's, Professor Brathwaite's earlier work also functions within this retentionist line, but then he also threw in some creativity along the way. He recognized that it wasn't just about how is Africa persistent in our presence. He took that as a given after a while, but it was how did our Creole existence, our Afro-Caribbean existence, Indo-Caribbean existence begin to maintain the Africanity of our ancestral core, but also mix it up with what it is we found here, right? We see that in the work of Sylvia Wynter when she speaks about indigenization and this idea of the localizing of our existence, the localizing of our heritage, and that idea of pulling these various strands to make sense of this world. That is why I sing of the ancestors in a Criollo that comes from Angola, that comes into Cuba, that comes to me as a Jamaican, and then I sing it in a Barbados context. But it all is a reference to that oneness of source. And so in our gathering today, we want to keep this idea of oneness and not this kind of disparate way of seeing how we may praise the divine, but to recognize there's a oneness of source that goes through many names and through many lands. And there is a space to recognize each at the table, that we are each breaking bread, we're each lathering with olive oil. There's a space that whether this, as I see there's some Cuban visitors outside and they stopped in front of the altar with a sign of recognition and acknowledgement, because they recognize the assemblage of plants and herbs, and they would say, hey, what's going on here? They recognize the Florida water, they recognize the grains. There are things, elemental things, attributes, which we may call utilitarian, right? But these said utilitarian things, once they are brought together in a sacred space, once the space is sanctified, as our bishop so beautifully did, once the space is gathered with the good and positive intentions, that grains become food for our ancestors, that oil becomes the salves for our atonement and anointment, that these plants no longer are just in the garden, but they could be prayed over and used to heal. And that is the lessons and the wisdom that our ancestors brought to us. and deposit to us in these little ways. And so this conversation is about really thinking through how we can see these worlds as not only coexisting, but in particular within the spiritual Baptist faith, how they are enmeshed, right? How they are enmeshed within one another without one taking precedence over another. That there's an idea that one could be African and still praise Christ, and a recognition that one could praise Christ and still be African. Yeah, and a recognition that if you were in, as you see, there are two shaks outside from my shrine, a Vodun shrine, that one could open up a Vodun ceremony with an Action de Grâce, which is Catholic litanies, right? And that this is the world of which our ancestors have come to understand, that these multiple worlds coexist. And it's in their coexistence that we are able to be powerful. It's in their coexistence that we are able to find room, find a pathway, right? Find a road. There's no accident that in spiritual Baptist, road has a significance when one is mourning and is finding that road, giving that point, being pointed, and that a road within Lukumi traditions, Camino, we all have roads to travel. And you have roads of your faith, you have roads of your crown, whichever Orisha you have been initiated to. You have the road of your name and the power of what a name means. And so we could see these worlds as being supposedly opposed with one another, but in fact, they share a similar universe, right? They share points of connections that are part of what make them meaningful for those who are practitioners and make them meaningful for themselves. And there's an aesthetic dimension, and there's a performative dimension, and there's a fully embodied dimension, right? So if I was to just sing for Baba, I was saying Baba like Papa Legba, and be still, that would be incongruous to what it is he's asking to do. If you are a pathfinder, you can't be still. If you're a pathfinder, you need to find the path and open the way so that communication could happen, right? So what we have for you today is an opening panel. And I'm so delighted because this is where, for me, theory and practice come together, where the university and the community to come together, and the idea that knowledge is to be shared, right? Ogbedi, knowledge is to be divided and shared. It's not to be honed onto yourself. And that the space of the ivory towers of a university wall isn't the only place of which knowledge is to be shared, that we must find spaces to make contact with our community and recognize that wisdom lies in the belly bottom of our community members. It lies in their practices, it lies in their backyards. All of this information is part of the existence of what makes us all able to hold space with one another. And it's to share that space with one another, right? So today we have an opening panel of cultural studies alumni and current students. I'm really excited about that, to really see the work of our graduate students, that the work that they're doing as academics, as scholars, as practitioners, and what they are doing to bring light, critical light to the traditions of which they have been immersed in, but also ones of which they share and bring a critical eye to. And so we have, we're going to go in the order of our Chief Cultural Officer of the NCF, Andrea Wells, who completed a Master's of Arts in Cultural Studies, where she explored the Granville's Church, the patriarch, but also, more importantly, the tradition of iconography, the iconographic markings that are part of the practice within spiritual Baptists. And I think in part it was inspired by a trip to Haiti and seeing the Vodun Vevez, but also relating that to the tradition of mark making that's part of the Taino world, that's part of the Congo universe. So this idea of ideographic markings have been a central component to Africana spiritualities. We will then move to, I believe, Queen Mother Irika Jelani, who will be providing for us a broad overview, because she's coming as Queen Mother, she's coming as pointress, she's coming as scholar, as herbalist, healer. So I hope she's able to distill that into 20 minutes, but she's coming with a frame and a paper that kind of sets the tone of beginning to explore spiritual baptism and its intersections with other traditions, but also the healing practices embedded within it. And sorry to go back, and Andrea Wells is presenting a kind of arc of looking at spiritual Baptists in Barbados and its evolution over time. And we close out our first panel with King Shepherd, if I may, John Hunt, who's also part of the, well, John Hunt, I'll leave that. I want to open up a thing that I wasn't quite sure. Who will be presenting a work that is very dear to him as a dancer, a mover, the recognition of the potency of breath and the work that adoption does in terms of opening new paths, right? So, and then we have with our Major Alfred Taylor, who will be presenting this afternoon. So I won't present him just yet, but he'll be presenting this afternoon. But I'll turn the table over to our panelists, who will then open our sessions today. Yeah. So I guess you could all, do you want to sit? We could all sit. Yes. This one? Yes. Put it on slideshow. And I just press them. Which one, right? I'm sorry, I can just. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Madrina. Thank you, all of you, for taking your time to come here this morning to share with us. No, that's not me. It might be a good time now to put our phones on silent or vibrate. My presentation this morning is not really going to dive into the mark making traditions, which is really the core of my research for my master's in cultural studies, but I'm going to use a reference on one of the chapters in my thesis that looks at the development of the spiritual Baptists, how it got to Barbados, and an overview of its history in the region, just to set the stage for an understanding of how members of the faith define themselves and how they're seen by the wider community, and how that has grown and changed over time. Okay, now, if only the PowerPoint would. Yeah, it's not. Where's the technician? For some reason, it's not allowing me to change the slide. Hi, dear, if you can help me here. It seems frozen. I'm not sure why. I was tapping down. It's not allowing me to move off of slide one. Shall I close them right up? Right? Should I close and then maybe reopen? Technology. Okay, now it has, okay, two. Okay, okay. Okay. Yes, stop. Okay. All right. So we begin. What is the spiritual Baptist faith?
A synopsis would say that it is a self-proclaimed Christian church, and I think that's very important because there have been judgments by established churches and earlier practices that would deny this. It reflects a merging of the cultures of the region. It is mainly prevalent in the Southern and Eastern Caribbean, Trinidad, St. Vincent, Barbados, Grenada, Guyana, and its diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora in Canada, Venezuela, the USA, in the UK, as well as in Canada. Essentially, its spread reflects patterns of migration of Caribbean people. It's not, oh dear. All right. Central to its beliefs and practices are the major practice of full immersion in living waters, baptism in a river or in the sea. Initiates then become the spiritual children of the leaders who've baptized them and brothers and sisters of persons of that temple. Central is also the ritual of mourning, which is a period of guided meditation. It's very important for personal development, but also the development of the community. It includes fasting and intense prayer in an inner chamber, either in or near to the church. And there we go again. Oh dear, it's stuck again. I'm not sure why. Technician, I'm going to need, I'll end up presenting without images, and I think the images are so important to this. It's not responding. Stuck again. No, doesn't help. Misting. Shut and reopen. One slide. That one. No. Yeah. Yeah. It's not responding.
They're not responding. One way is one next.
The other way. Okay,
I think there's a format.
I see.
Has to
Okay,
do with format.
okay. Okay,
You
I'll
can say
pull it up. I'll pull it up on my phone and read from here
And
then.
just go to it from there.
Okay. Okay.
Format.
Right. The practice of immersion in living waters, creation of a new family bound together by common beliefs and experiences, the ritual of mourning. And mourning is very important, very central to the development of the individual, but also of the community. And it bears many similarities to some initiation rituals in some African traditions. The use of the rhythmic percussion, very important. Some churches use drums, drumming on benches, stamping the floors, but also drumming on their bodies, and the use of adoptions, which Prince Shepherd will be presenting on more in his presentation. During services, the Holy Spirit may descend at any point during the service, and that would include the individual to experience the Spirit and be invisibly seen to sway irregularly or shout, speaking tongues, shake, and maybe eventually fall to the ground in a trance-like state. Services generally last a minimum of 4 hours. Color is very important. The use of color in garments, in flags, and sometimes in the seals, that is the marking of spaces and objects. And this is something that the Baptist faith does have in common with many other Afro-diasporic practices and religions, Candomblé, Rastafari, etc. The spiritual Baptist faith has a clear hierarchical structure made up of a complex series of ranked positions, most common being that of leader, mother, shepherd, pointer, nurse, prover, captain, teacher. And the first two, leader and mother, generally indicate highest ranking male and female members. Larger churches have more complex ranks, including reverend, deacon, archdeacon, bishop, and archbishop. And as the norm in many Christian churches, women constitute the majority of the membership and play many key roles within the structure of individual temples. Some churches are currently led by women holding the rank of mother or reverend mother. Influences in the spiritual Baptist church in terms of the creation of this faith in the region are quite diverse. They're often, the African traditions are often most seen, most obvious and identifiable, and similarities are seen from the Dahomey, Congo, various other West African tribes, and Yoruba. The practice of mark making in particular has a strong Congo provenance. Also, the Kabbalah, which is a Jewish mystic tradition, Eastern religions, such as Hindu and Islam, the Masonic fraternities and varieties of other Eastern practices. These influences shape and continue to shape the spiritual Baptist practice today. Influences also came from US and UK sources. The Calvinistic Baptist would have founded the Baptist Missionary Society in England in 1792. And their work would have spread throughout the British Empire, including the US. As a result, European-derived Baptist faith spread from North America to the Caribbean in the 18th and 19th centuries. The practice reached Trinidad via former slaves from the US, the first group arriving in Trinidad in 1803, after being granted their freedom for fighting with the British in the American War of Independence. Many of the practices once transposed to Trinidad fused with more African forms of worship common to the island. Evangelical Christianity also arrived in the region from the USA in the 20th century and became a dynamic tool for converting persons to the Christian faith. It promoted features now considered typical of the spiritual Baptist practice, that is, adult baptism, active participation in services by the congregation, faith healing, talking in tongues, and evangelistic preaching. This was considered a more engaging and participatory form of worship and became a dynamic tool for converting persons to the Christian faith. And with these influences and changes, also tensions arose. The African-American Baptist practices that synthesized with more African patterns of worship resulted in such churches being banned from the Baptist Missionary Society in Trinidad in 1907. The banned group subsequently formed the Union of Independent Baptist Churches. However, along with the London and Independent Baptists, some even more African-oriented groups alternately called and often dismissively called Bush Baptists, Candle Baptists, Shelter Baptists, Wayside Baptists, etc., would have developed during the same time. And the naming of these churches in the popular narrative obviously reflects a very dismissive bias against them at the time. We've seen this hold true in Barbados, where often spiritual Baptists are lumped under the title of Granvilleite or tie heads. And though dismissive, these terms are often claimed and used very positively by the community of Baptists. The hierarchy and resulting tensions in the community around the region, in Trinidad and Barbados as well, still persist today, with some Baptist churches in Trinidad denying a common origin or even heritage with the spiritual Baptists or with the Orisha traditions as seen in their worship. Churches that obviously merge these two traditions are often referred to, and sometimes negatively so, as Shango Baptists, a title that is often strongly opposed by some members of either faith. Influences on the church's doctrine and practice has also been sociopolitical. In the early 20th century, Garveyism, the empowering doctrine of pride in African origin and self-actualization by persons of the African diaspora, as promoted by Marcus Garvey and his United Negro Improvement Association, presented Jesus as a liberator of the oppressed, which made for a very practical application of the Christian faith in the wider Garveyist project of Black empowerment. The spiritual Baptist religion therefore developed in Trinidad in the 19th century against the background of growing Afro-diasporic political awareness, African and Indian practices, and diverse, although contested, European-derived belief systems. African and Afro-centered religion in the colonial context were considered subversive and were prohibited by the planter class and colonial governments of the day. The mixing of different African ethnic groups led to the enslaved remodeling their traditions, resulting in the creolization of African religions within the Caribbean. But this process actually would have started prior to their departure from Africa, where many diverse nations and groups would have been bought, stolen, made to march, sometimes for days, weeks, months, across various different cultural areas, and housed together in barracoons awaiting purchase and shipment to the Caribbean. So that process of acculturation and exchange and sharing would have begun even before our ancestors would have left the continent. But with the act of prohibition and banning, many practices such as congregating, beating of drums, healing practices were prohibited, and even this continued even after emancipation. With harsh punishments for the practice of the same, whipping, imprisonment, and hard labor that were unfortunately the norm for those who dare to practice their faith. Such gathering and religious practices were very much implicated in various rebellions across the region. The intolerance of such African practices resulted in many Afro-Creole practices increasingly being fused with European Christian ones. The practices of the spiritual Baptist religion, with its use of clairvoyance, healing, benevolence, blessing of people, spaces, and objects, which are considered to be a core part of Baptist work even to today, that is inspired by the Holy Spirit. Many of these practices, in spite of their similarity to some formal Christian practices, are still dismissively associated with witchcraft. But the origins of the Baptist Church in Barbados not only draw from Trinidad as a source, but also St. Vincent. In the 1850s, a strand of the spiritual Baptist practice locates its origin within Methodism in St. Vincent. The converted, they were referred to these practices as the converted or Shakers, was a fundamentalist Protestant movement with strong African ritual practice. Many Shakers emigrated to Trinidad and Grenada between 1912 to 1965 due to the 1912 Shaker Prohibition Ordinance, which was enacted in St. Vincent, and the persecution that was enacted on churches as a result. Trinidad's attraction at that time also included the better wages that were offered due to the oil boom that that country was experiencing. However, in spite of some variance in practice, the St. Vincent practitioners became a vibrant part of Trinidad's spiritual Baptist community in the early 20th century. Some strands of the church also relate its origins to Grenada, said to have been established by Trinidadians of Yoruban ethnicity who settled in Grenada. This group was reputed to have converted to Protestantism in Trinidad, resulted in them being repeatedly pressured by both their Yoruba neighbors and the Catholic Church. And to escape that, they emigrated to St. Vincent and then to Grenada. So as you see, the practice developed in a very diverse and interesting way with a movement of people, again, in the Southern Caribbean. The prohibitions of the practice, every country that the movement developed in also had to deal with practice in the face of prohibition. In Trinidad, the Shelter Prohibition Order of 1917, which was modeled after the 1912 St. Vincent Order, prohibited persons from engaging in key practice of spiritual Baptist worship, public gatherings, the holding of flowers or lighted candles, public meetings, ringing of bells, wearing a white head tie, or even the shaking of the body in any form. Worship that included loud singing and ringing of bells, dancing, or any expressive behavior, such as catching the spirit, was considered a disturbance of the peace. In 1927, Grenada's public meetings or Shakerism Prohibition Order was enacted. And that prohibition, as well as the prohibition order in Trinidad, forced much of the practice underground. It didn't stop it. It made it illegal, but it did not eradicate it. The established churches were alarmed at the number of worshipers leaving their congregations to join the Shelter Baptists, in spite of the hierarchy's position that those practices were heathen and anti-Christian. In the 1940s, Elton George Griffith, Grenadian-born faith leader, but based in Trinidad, started a campaign to have the prohibition ordinance repealed. He spearheaded a body representing the numerous independent Baptist churches. The West Indian Evangelical Spiritual Baptist Faith was its name, and he eventually achieved its repeal in 1951. And the 1950s is when the practice of this faith began to impact in Barbados. Granville Williams, on his death, Patriarch Archbishop Granville Williams, was baptized by Elton Griffith into the Spiritual Baptist faith between 1941 to 1957 in Trinidad. On his return to Barbados in 1957, he established the Sons of God Apostolic Spiritual Baptist Church, which is currently the largest spiritual Baptist congregation on the island. Other Baptist churches in Barbados credit their origins to St. Vincent, with ties also to Grenada, having been established by those who immigrated from those islands. However, another spiritual Baptist church was reported to have preceded Sons of God in Barbados in the early 1950s under the leadership of Alexander Sam, also known as Brother Sam, Leader Sam, or Bobo Sam, believed to have immigrated to Barbados from St. Vincent. He conducted many services from his Britton Hill residence and at various wayside venues, and much of his work was said to have later been eclipsed by the quickly growing congregation of Archbishop Granville Williams. Leader Sam's church did not persist. However, my interviews with members of the faith and various temples in 2014, many people indicated that and insisted of his importance as being the earliest promoter of this faith on the island. In 2014, there were 16 temples identified, And I would have met with various members of their congregation in furthering my research. Notably, they were all established in predominantly working class residential neighborhoods in the south and southwest of the island, mostly in Christchurch and St. Michael. The size of each congregation varied greatly, with most churches reporting a membership of less than 35 persons. But there was a variance noted in how people define membership. Some defined their membership based on the active practitioners, the persons who were active at the time, others, the numbers that had passed through or had been baptized. It was noticed that then the community of churches were in flux, and a very vibrant and observed practice of members leaving one church to join another, one spiritual Baptist church to join another, or maybe to start their own. So the progress and the development of each church are basically based on the leader's motivations as inspired by the Spirit. Each leader actively exercises an independence that in the majority of cases refuses to be guided by any central earthly authority. And this focus on being guided by the Spirit while resulting in continual flux and change in the community is at the same time a defining commonality among these churches. So it has been observed from its early research on the spiritual Baptist movement in the region that different groups of spiritual Baptists are considered to fall on a spectrum from the more orthodox to unorthodox. The orthodox tend to be more thoroughly Protestant in their theology, accepting the doctrine of the Trinity and the authority of the Bible, and repudiating any association with the Orisha tradition. Other spiritual Baptist churches tend to be more eclectic, absorbing and acknowledging their observance of an array of influences from other religious and spiritual traditions. But there's a unity in practice. The basic central beliefs and rituals unite these autonomous structures, these autonomous churches, to an extent, in spite of a lack of a broader organizational structure. Central beliefs are in baptism in living waters, proving, mourning, possession by the Holy Spirit, the physical manifestation of such possession in shaking, dancing, speaking in tongues, and the bringing back of spiritual gifts for the wider congregation by members who have mourned. All of these beliefs and practices are at the core of the spiritual Baptist faith, wherever it exists. In more recent years, there have been greater state recognition of the faith. In Barbados, the Sons of God Spiritual Baptist Church has, since 1978, been a highly visible part of the annual Crop Over Festival and officiates at the official opening ceremony. This church is also represented on the Barbados Ecclesiastical Council. Although it's only one of 16 churches, based on my survey in 2014 and listed by the Council of Spiritual Baptists, its membership was indicated in 2014 to be over 10,000 persons, and that number is greater than all others combined. So therefore, based on their numbers alone, is very influential, with many of their members being drawn from the middle class. In Trinidad, on March 30th, the state has dedicated that date, which is the original date of that country's repeal of the Prohibition Ordinance in 1951, as Spiritual Shouter Baptist Liberation Day, and it is a national bank holiday. There have been efforts made by the various temples around the region to organize for greater collective recognition. In 1942, while the Prohibition Order in Trinidad was still in force, the first corporate body of Spiritual Baptists was founded. Incorporated in November 1949, its founders wanted to distinguish themselves on the basis of their ritual practice. A second organization, the National Evangelical Spiritual Baptist Faith Diocese, was founded by Elton Griffith in 1945. And the formation of these two bodies can be seen as the beginning of an effort at self-definition on a national level towards building the profile and the respectability of the faith. In Barbados, in 2011, the Council of Spiritual Baptist Churches was initiated as an informal association to seek recognition of the body of SBCs on the island, to evangelize according to the faith, and to assist the churches collectively or individually according to their needs. The interim president is King Shepherd John Hunt. Towards global unification, the Apostolic Patriarchate of the Spiritual Baptist Faith was founded in New York in 2005. Leadership was identified in various places, and jurisdictional patriarchs were appointed in 6 countries. In Barbados, late Archbishop Granville Williams was identified as a patriarch for the faith at the time in Barbados. Notably, all patriarchs are male leaders selected to represent the jurisdictions of Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and New York. And in conclusion, the Spiritual Baptist faith remains one of the most dynamic Indigenous Caribbean cultural expressions that motivates and empowers its membership with a message of Black divinity. Its location of Africa, firmly within biblical doctrine, and its establishment of the experiences of Caribbean peoples of African descent as a part of the biblical journey of the chosen people, represents the transforming of a faith that in its original teaching by European colonizers was used as a tool of domination and control. The Caribbean expression of faith has therefore flipped the script towards the spiritual empowerment of its people. I thank you.
Greetings to each and every one. It is a pleasure to be present at this symposium today as one of the presenters on this distinguished panel to discuss the topic centering Afrocentric spirituality in Afro-Christian narratives. My presentation today analyzing varying sets of philosophies and spiritual practices within the sacred systems of spiritual Baptists, with references to other spiritual and ritual practices in Barbados and other Eastern and Southern Caribbean countries. And, you know, this aspect of prayer, chant, and ritual healing is what, you know, my topic will be about today. Andrea. Yeah, yeah, do the next one. Please do it.
Same challenge here. Technician, can you help us? We may have to close and open again. Is that? It's not moving. Okay, now.
Press your.
Press here to
But
us.
move your arm the first, move the arrow
Mhm.
down. Right, move the arrow down. It's like 9.
There you are.
No, it's gone down to 9.
Let me back.
So you saying the format? It's a format?
Yeah, it's format.
Show
Right,
me where to
it's
press.
on this screen.
So that-
Yeah, then the
it's
next.
on
one.
screen.
So where the press next? Where the press next?
Quick go twice and see if it
Okay.
shifts.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Mhm.
want to see if it shifts and then go back before you leave? No. Yes,
Mhm.
Format.
Let me get close and open it down. It's I read second.
Isn't it different?
It's not on the screen. Yes.
Format.
Can you stand up?
Yeah, yeah, man. Once you get that, sort out. I like to sing, you know. And in terms of Afro spiritual traditions and spirituality, you know, the energy, solidarity, you know, community, all that is very important, you know. And raise the trumpet, Master God, God. Master God, God in the morning, God in the evening, Master God, Master God, oh yo, Master God, God in the morning, God in the evening, Master God. Oi.
Let's say the pattern will go down to, just go down to.
All right, so I'll go up. In the morning, God in the evening, Master God, God. Oh yes, Ashe. So, you know, the aims and objectives of my presentation is to discuss the beliefs and spiritual practices that helps to shape the identity of Afrocentric spirituality, especially as it pertains to spiritual Baptist and other Afro-Caribbean spiritual traditions. It touches on issues of migration, cross-cultural influences, prohibition ordinances, and elements of divine songs and incantations. It specifically focuses on prayer chants and ritual healing practices found in Afro-Christian narratives. Well, my methodology includes qualitative analysis and archival research studies, including books, articles, photographs, etc., as well as in-depth discussions with, you know, practitioners in the faiths and so on, but mainly field work and participant observation in religious ceremonies and rites, congregational gatherings, and individual sacred practice. And a lot of the information, as I was saying earlier, is gathered from consented interviews and discussions with spiritual Baptist practitioners. And my literature is wide-ranging, but for this presentation, Paul Griffith, John MBT, David Westerlund, among others, would be lean on pertaining to the topic. But within Afro spiritual tradition, there is this whole aspect of migration And this element of being separated from Africa, from where the white society held us captives, in terms of enslavement of African in a hostile environment. But then as it relates, even though that was so, David Westerland maintains that prayer and offerings are means of establishing contact and our communication between the worshipers of God. So that is the element of what we will be looking at in terms of how, on one hand, we had resistance, we had horrific experiences with the transatlantic slave trade and forced labor and lack of freedom. And also we have, this element of prayer and faith to keep us going and to survive the hard times. So basically, I would say that Afro spirituality in Afro-Christian narrative speaks of history, culture, and religious cosmologies that are complex and multi-dynamic. The narratives I present today is framed against 19th century slavery through the liberation struggle up to these contemporary times. And basically, when we look at the beliefs of Afrocentric spirituality, I would say that, in addition to the gods, the spirits, the ancestral veneration and supernatural powers, I would say that Afrocentric spirituality forms the core of life for many Africans on the continent, the Caribbean, and the wider diaspora. Spirituality appears in their ceremonies, festivals, dance, rituals, song, and oral stories. So whether from the working class, underprivileged, or affluent segments of society, many Africans embrace Afrocentric spirituality as part of their liberty and everyday cultural way of life. And, and Betty says, they take it everywhere, to work, to harvesting the crops, to funeral ceremonies, to school and universities. And if he's a politician, he takes it to the House of Parliament as well. But Patrick Taylor echoed that religion is part of the whole of the people. It is what comes out of their bellies, out of their wombs, out of their head. Likewise, Hideki emphasized, separated from Africa and from the white society that held them captive, and enslaved African brought into a hostile environment of the American society could not survive without African religion. And that will show you the importance of Afrocentric spirituality and how it was used by many enslaved as a source of solace, as a remedy and a refuge from the hardships of life and so on. But within the belief systems, we have baptism and mourning, we have Thanksgiving, we have, various different ceremonies, gatherings, events, and also this element of receiving gifts through dreams and visions, which comes a lot, according to the spiritual Baptists, from the mourning ground. Where when you go to the mourning ground, bands are placed upon thee, and you are given words. Your words are whispered in your ears in terms of being given a pass. You are asked even to pick a proof in terms of divination processes or readings, and so that you can chart or kind of diagnose in a spiritual way what is really going on, or what road, or whether you reach a junction, a crossroad, or which avenue that you're going to take. So a lot of the ranks, a lot of the gifts, a lot of the elevation, sometimes the elders will say, don't look to man, look to spirit. Because when spirit teach you, you are well taught. So this element of dreams and visions and intuition, are having spiritual eyes or eyes of faith, where sometimes the elders will say they're right here standing or sitting, and they could sense, some could see, some could feel, you understand? So they're different. It is very diverse, and there are many variations to the practices. And as I said, it is very multi-dynamic and complex as well. So when we look, as I said before, migration, which is movement of a people across borders, and this aspect of Afrocentric spirituality, which I'm focusing on looking at within the Caribbean, the Anglophone Caribbean islands of Barbados and so on, where the transatlantic slave trade transported millions of Africans and other races across land and sea. And then another element of migration and integration process is the close proximity of the Caribbean islands to each other affords the opportunity of interregional travel and the exchange of knowledge and communal spiritual practice. So I would say that we in the Caribbean, Africans in the Caribbean, are united by a common history and communal practices. And the fact that when there's an event, you can just, well, some people say island hop, but you can just, travel from region to region, even though now the airfare is very expensive in some forms, and there's no boat ferries to take us like before, but you still find that element of camaraderie and building linkages and communication networks by the constant travel and movement, amongst each other. So I was saying before that this element of prohibition ordinances, but I want you all to understand that when we're looking at Afro-Christian narratives and African spiritual traditions, these faiths are called by different names. They are represented under banners of Black Atlantic religions, Caribbean Creole religions, African-derived religions, or diasporic spiritual faiths. In the French-speaking Caribbean island of Haiti, the Afro-Creole religion is called Vodun. In the Spanish Caribbean countries like Cuba, there is Santeria, and Cambodia in Brazil. Belize has the Garifuna tradition. In the English-speaking islands of Jamaica, there's Kumina, Mayal, Zion, Revivalists. In Guyana, the Fietes, Jordanites, and Kumfa. Then in the windward, southern, and eastern Caribbean islands of Barbados, St. Vincent, and Trinidad and Tobago, as well as Grenada, they are the spiritual Baptists, Orisha, Shango Baptists, or some people have Ifa as well. And then there's a Rastafari that is established in the Caribbean. And even though that the various Afro-spiritual groups have varying beliefs surrounding spirits, God, ancestral veneration, where the Orisha revere Olodumare and pay homage to their positive ancestors, the Rastafari have the ideological concept surrounding Haile Selassie of Ethiopia as God and King, and the prophecy, hold fast to the prophecy of Marcus Garvey as a strong stance of liberation. But Morgan is saying that though African beliefs that filter through to America had many variations, they all acknowledge the existence of a supreme being and invokes the spirit of nature and the ancestors. So while that is so, and that they are function as crucial repositories of knowledge and barnyards that offer solace, meditation, praise, and healing, many of the spiritual traditions were banned and restricted. In the past, prohibition laws were enforced in St. Vincent and Trinidad, banning the beating of drums, the ringing of the bells, the keeping of spiritual Baptist service. But Henry even said that the playing of drums were completely banned since 1883, and almost asserted that the social pressures brought about by the growing population of free-colored peasantry also saw certain religious and cultural practices being prohibited. So we know that even right now, that there's still a negative distance, as Diane Stewart called it, where there's a lot of negative connotation and, the stigma of obia, which hinders the progress of African spiritual tradition. But many Africans in the Caribbean, the diaspora, and the continent were persistent. They were resilient in the fact that this is what their belief in and their philosophy and worldviews and they held on to it. And many of them in various forms are still here with us today. So I would say that Afro-spiritual traditions have survived and resisted the struggles, the persecution, the prosecution of the state, and even members and segment of society that have issues with them. So, but I know that my elders always say that they had to, all four parents had to run to the hills and hide. Many were locked up, many were beaten, many were jailed, you know, to maintain this African tradition. And we in this present time now should be more than grateful for the contribution and the foundation that the elders have set, you know, as building blocks to maintain the continuum of Afro-spiritual tradition. Yeah. So, but then when I was doing the research, we talking about this whole double consciousness. W.E. Boys talk about that. And in terms of the duality and the variations of races that merge in the Caribbean. And that has something to do with it when I'm looking at cross-cultural influences. Cross-cultural influences from our experience, where many races were amalgamated together in these spaces and in these environments. So we have elements of Indian, as we can see in the brass vessels and so on. Then we have elements of Chinese in terms of their medicine, and still when spiritual Baptist people go to mourn, they will bring back visions about, I see a Chinese man and I see an Indian man, you know? And then there's that also that your Christian principle, right, of Christianity, all that merged now and fused with Afro-spiritual traditions. So the syncretized fusion that are indicative of spiritual and ritual practices of African-derived religions are consolidated with aspects of African traditional practices, Euro-Christian concept, as well as influences from Indian and other races. So we're looking at the reading of the Bible scriptures, repetitive liturgies, certain prayers and songs. Right, certain prayers and songs, right, that points to Anglican, Catholic, Protestant, and Methodist Christian teachings. Up to this present time, litanies such as the Apostle Creed, Holy Mary, and Glory be to the Father are still being recited by some Afro-spiritual groups. So many soul-searching hymns are sung from the Wesley and Holiness Hymn Book. And these practices are fused with hymns, chants, groans, and music from traditional healing practices and other customs indicative of Africa. And those are some of the representing features that you know, are blended together to create these religions. And it said it was a relationship of these actions with Catholic or Protestant traditions which form the basis of the syncretism or the reinterpretation that each tradition developed. And even as it relates to Rastafari, Ohidiki endorsed the view and mentioned that the movement was founded on syncretic belief systems and blended biblical message with traditional African social thought. So even Rastafari as another tradition in this region, there as well also, you know, have Judeo-Christian attributes as well as African worldviews, especially as it relates to embracing Ethiopia as one of the islands that was never conquered, right? So we are in a multiracial, multi-faith, multicultural environment, and it has a lot of cultural and spiritual diversity and based a lot on retention of memory And as I said before, the resilience of the African people. But I would come it down by saying now that basically the theological beliefs of the spiritual Baptists, who is known in Trinidad as the Shouters, in St. Vincent as the Shakers, and in Barbados the tie, and wear beautiful regalia and head ties and horns and beautifully dressed. There are a syncretized blend of Christian theology and African practices. Henry pointed out that the spiritual Baptist and Orisha has African influence and is a mixed and syncretic form. Eudora Thomas states that the Yoruba African tribe, being the largest group, has strong association with the Congolese, Igbo, Dahomey, and Mandingos. Thomas firmly stressed that the close observation, spiritual Baptist faith is a mixture of ancient Yoruba, African customs, and concept of Christianity. Edmund puts this into perspective by saying, theologically, the spiritual Baptist faith is essentially Christian, accepting the Christian Trinity belief in God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the Bible as the authoritative source of its belief and practices. Liturgically, practices such as shouting and mourning are decidedly African in form and functions. But then I will end by saying that one of the hallmarks of Afrocentric spirituality will be divine songs and incantations. Because divine songs and incantation are powerful tools and techniques used to help evoke and activate the life source. Ritual words associated with God-infused breath or divine energy are powerful tools used to invoke that. And in addition to the bell, the drums, and other musical device, the body is the main percussive instrument that create words and songs and rhythmic patterns. When Afro-spiritual people come together and a song is raised, each individual join in holding a key, each singing in their own voice range, while harmonizing in a call and response rhythmic chant. When the singers and musicians each assemble their own isolated song, while giving and taking energy from one another, it in turn fused together, creating an ensemble of harmonious music and a oneness of energy. The singing and the tone of the rhythm can be somber and solemn, or can be vibrant and up-tempo. From my observation, when the energies rises and members join in unison with song, music, harmony, and sweet melody, the way of worship most times portray an atmosphere of a spiritual dance party. The loud clapping, praying, sharing of words, singing, chanting, playing of drums, the cymbal, the shot, the stomping of the feet, the swing, the shaking of the body, drilling, and the heavy ducks and songs, catching spirit, trance, or manifestation are all synonymous with the sacred performances that varies among spiritual Baptists. So I would say that right now, when we're looking at these different faiths, we're seeing variations, we're seeing similarities, we're seeing, the differences and everything. We're also seeing tensions because, while spiritual Baptists will hold fast to giving sacrifice and offering with grains and honey and oil and water, we see within the Orisha faith practice where they would do animal sacrifice and offering and so on, So we have the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox, ones that hold faith, faith in the principle of Jesus the Christ and the blood. And, when you're doing the whole communion thing, use the bread and the wine in a remembrance of me. Well, now they have other faiths that might not use the Bible at all, but they would more revere and venerate the ancestors and so on. But that does not mean in everything what you say, take what is for you and leave out the rest. So I would say that each one has to know God for themselves and have a personal relationship with God. But basically, that's the controversy, this question of God, but everyone has to know the God that they are serving. And within Afro-spiritual narratives and Christianity and so on, we have seen where the differences, has bring about a lot. And the key for me especially when looking at spiritual Baptist and Rastafari in the Bingy house, in the Thanksgiving, in the services, is this element of prayer, reading Psalms, liturgies, the songs. Oh man, sometimes they will give you a song that will just wake up the spirits. They will give you a song that will just, and like in terms of the enslaved, and imagine the amount of groaning and being in the spirit world. And then we singing, help of the helpless Lord, help of the helpless Lord, help of the helpless Lord, abide with me. Help of the helpless, help of the helpless Lord, help of the helpless Lord, abide with me. One more time, help of the helpless Lord, help of the helpless Lord, help of the helpless Lord, abide with me. Bless the Lord and thank you so much for listening to me.
Play the band of music. Play the band of music. Sitting in the kingdom, play the band of music, play the band of come see all the angels dancing, play the band of music, oh, come see all the angels dancing, play the band of music, come see all the angels dancing, play the band of music, oh, come see all the angels dancing. Good morning. Thought we needed a little pick me up, and that was a little transition space for the technical to do the little thing and et cetera, et cetera. I want to give thanks for my sisters on the panel. You almost left nothing else for me to talk about. And I want to give thanks to all those who came, especially members from the Spiritual Baptist community. I see Bishop Marlon with Mount Pisgah here. I also welcome the Oba and the Baba from the Orisha community who are here. And I also want to recognize my beloved sister Bahaife, who is also here. So I feel that we are full in this space and well represented. Oh, not forgetting my two Sangoma sisters, welcoming the birth of Sangoma into our community. Welcome. What I'm going to attempt to do is create what we call an embodied visceral narrative, right? For those of us who are devoted, that shows what we do in the Spiritual Baptist faith. Here, as you can see and feel, the singing, the rhythmic breathing, the aspirating bodies are co-opted to fortify high energy portals between worlds. This is how we communicate directly with the spirit. In these moments, we literally, metaphorically, and symbolically embody and manifest this line from the Bible. The word is made flesh and dwells among us, and we behold its beauty, full of grace and truth. in Gospel according to St. John, chapter 1, verse 14. So as we map through this moment, and I promise not to take long, although we spiritual Baptists always lie and say we're not going to be short. I'm going to hope to make tangible what has been a very much a lived experience for us as spiritual Baptist people, as practitioners. Hopefully, in trying to do so, I can clarify and then still complicate some of the previous documents written about us, what you heard about who we are and about what we do. So, as a representative of spiritual Baptist faith, I want to share about what we experience in our faith when our adoption becomes language and makes road. Again, born from the Gospel according to John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, with God, and the Word was God. So for us, when we manifest the Holy Spirit, we become one with God. Spiritual Baptist services are oftentimes long because they do not rigidly follow prescribed formats. We can't. In the ritual, it is ritual masking a ceremony. We have the ceremony of the format, and then we have the various rituals that happen at every aspect. At any juncture when a song is pitched, there is a connection to the spirit world that is established, and a road opens for the indwelling manifestation and transmission of the spirit. In these moments, the song signals the opening of portals of mystical healing and of divine messages. Our song becomes a sympathy, as my sister, the Queen Mother, has described. Or sonic disruption beckons, broadens, develops, and then transfers to the user, right? To usher in an embodied rhythm action called the spirit of adoption. Here, a road to the spirit world is created, and we spiritual Baptists journey in the spirit. Adoption becomes an important mechanism for spirit to come in and for devotees to launch out, to travel to specific locations in the spirit world, to commune and communicate with the divine, and then return to present time. So that can't take a short time, you understand? You gotta get it, find the address, communicate, get what I get, and then come back. And then peradventure, the service is at the same place, we can move on from there. So don't come for an hour or 45 minutes. Ain't gonna work. Right? So then for the service to continue to the next item in the program. Right? So often a charismatic leader or even a person giving a testimony or being called to read a lesson would open up with a song. Whether we imagine it, we are inspired or plan or prescribe that song, its lyric, its chosen melodic line, its application to rhythm and tone sets the environment for how the spoken word will be received. At other times, it is the word itself that disrupts space and peace. Still, as the song and its intention is launched out, people who are aligned, people who are aware, people who are connected, and in time begin to feel, know, see, sense something. They move by a calling. So I want to offer us, because we've been hearing a lot, and those of us who know, but for those of us who may not know, I want to share a sample of what happens in one of our what we call house churches. This is probably one of our more established churches within the Spiritual Baptist faith. This is Jeremiah Spiritual Baptist Church. This is a Thanksgiving that happened a few years ago, and I want to be thankful for the Queen Mother's daughter, Subir Jelani, who is the maker of this film. You will see some of ourselves in it, those of us who know ourselves, and we will also see people who are now our ancestors who have passed away. So brace yourself. One second. That'll be in the I mean, I'd be tempted to say the best thing to do is to come, but you see them together. And technical person disappears. All right, while he's coming, so this is the Thanksgiving service. And you're seeing the charismatic leader in the front giving the sermon. And a song has opened up. And that song has now come with rhythmic application and vibration. And various people who have various roles and responsibilities in the spirit world begin to take out the instruments and begin to labor in the spirit. So we're gonna watch this for a few minutes. So you can see how, quote unquote, the spirit of adoption begins to activate people to move. Everything about the spiritual Baptist faith in terms of clothing, in terms of the various instruments, the belts, the towels, the head wraps, the colors of the head wraps, the use of the rope, have symbolic meaning. There's no accident or no incidental about this. You will see the women tend to dress more traditionally, tend to dress more in the keeping of how we would have imagined or how we would have seen in the early 20th century. Whereas the guys have a little bit more liberties, some of us, and then some of us would go into a religious space. So here we would see a collection of people from not only from St. Vincent who would have migrated to Barbados to work, but we would also see people from Guyana, the Faithists and Jordanites that the Queen Mother has spoken about, people from Jamaica who are practitioners of Kumina, people from Grenada as well. So you're seeing a wide variety of people who find themselves in this space and find unity and community in that space. As you can see, the implements are also very much a part of what happens in that, what we call the high altar, but it's also the center pole in which a lot of the stuff that we would use for other kinds of work would be found. Let me come back to that. So every aspect of this technology, which we hope to get back to, provides a layer. Everything that we do is layered. The more we layer, the more we immerse. Sometimes one layer is enough to get us in tune. And in other instances, we need a layer. Sometimes each aspect is enough, and at other times combinations work together to open portals of healing and meditation, messages, warnings, prophecy, and wisdom. In other places, especially in communal acts of worship or ritual, the harmonic interaction of these various devices function to create a portal for communication through a rift. Further, that vibration also functions to activate us, the devotees, to transcend these physical selves to quote unquote journey in the spirit. So while the bodies and voices provide the labor to hold the space for us on this physical realm, what we are sensing and feeling is that we are being transported, almost the idea of a ship, from one state of consciousness or one dimension to the dimension where the spirit will provide the necessary information, provide the necessary treatment, provide the necessary healing, etc. And for us, it doesn't feel like hysterics, it doesn't feel like hysteria, it doesn't feel like mass hysteria, it feels very much like a real and visceral activity. So cognizant of this is the call and response, as the Queen Mother had also spoken about, this aspect perspective about who is doing the calling and who is answering. So a cycle is created when one person calls and when one person answers, creating that cycle or circle, which then begins to spiral within the spirit. So in this instance, we were responding to people like Jane Alexander in that approach, who is calling, who is responding. From a spiritual approach, the songs come, the words come, the wisdom that we receive is downloaded into us. And what seems to us as inspiration is actually direction. What comes to us as intuition becomes that message, that prophecy. And this connection and alignment is vibrant in a spiritual space. It brings a sense of humbleness and humility that carries an awesome responsibility. Because to flirt with this gift, to risk misusing it, can affect the karma and sanctity of the people's lives individually, and sometimes the sanctity of the community in which they serve. Therefore, it is important to know and to trust your intention, your connection, your reflections, and what you're resonating with, to be open to moving into the vibration. Because once we're open, our intention is registered, the spirit is invested in serving us, and we travel as if we were being lifted up and carried. This communal expression becomes a ship where each person's gift or task works collectively and cooperatively to achieve the spiritual intent, whether to preach or lead, whether to shepherd, to heal, to teach, to inspect, to carry water, to do various sanctifications. So in this particular instance, you would have noticed that as the film progressed, you would have seen more and more people who have caught up as they got into alignment and come together in a communal space, usually in the center of the space. And now they're actually moving with a different energy. We would consider that they've reached a junction and are now traveling on a different road. And sometimes these roads can actually be mapped, especially for those of us who have the gift of divination or pointer or shepherd. You can actually know based on how they're moving, which road they're traveling, and sometimes get to know where they're going. I was going to sing I know where we're going, but I don't know where we're going because the technical person didn't give me the sound yet. But we're not getting any sound? Okay. Cool. Interesting to watch it without the music, because then you can focus on the ritual act. As you can see, everybody's not moving in a choreographic way, or they're moving together in a ritual way. And that also heightens the idea of creating a space for the people who may be more involved, more deeply involved, to receive what they're to receive. So some people hold space in support, while others may be more deeply involved or more directly involved in the divine act of worship. I was going to move on. Okay. Right, so what we are dealing with is what Roger would call communal transference, right? Where during services and rituals, or in the morning room or secret room, where we are there periods of isolation, immobility, and corporal chastisement, separating from what we call the physical world, we are then involved and invested in communicating through the inspiration of the Spirit. So within that context, our sighing, our rhythmic breathing, our singing, and the way that we aspirate in our bodies as we begin to breathe in and out is co-opted. So the idea of the actual breath itself, and sometimes the rhythm of our heart beating, is enough to begin this concept and this focus on this connection to spirit. So we think of these as codes, as symbols that have meanings. And these signs activate steps or roads or shapes or cities or spaces or entities within the world that we might connect with, that we might communicate with, and we receive instructions from. Sometimes the singing might be enough to create that transference. At other times, it's a combination of what you would have been experienced in the video, which works together to open those portals of healing. And some of the key times for us, as the Queen Mother would have also indicated, the key times that we would consider very much a part of our investing or being involved in the spiritual Baptist movement is through the open admission through baptism in living water, and then through groaning and moaning, and then through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, actively seeking to have the Spirit guide us on our journey. So this is an image of the Lady Bishop, the late Queen Catherine Edwards, beginning to put bands on, I guess that's me. Yeah, when I was going for my ordination in St. Vincent. So there's also the lay archdeacon over there. So this idea of going into what we call a secret room, a room that is not set up for any ceremony, but is set up for the and stripped of all kind of comforts, right? In order for us to focus in on the meaning of what it means to actually mourn and groan. And in this aspect, it is best to experience this as a part of what we go through the various utterances of song and sound. So as we begin to engage with the spiritual Baptist faith, we set out to come to know the space where we come from and come to an understanding of ourselves. So for Mercy Seat, for instance, we may be asked to spend maybe a week, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, where you come in and you sit on what we call Mercy Seat, and you come into an atonement and repent of all your sins. So you literally come with your head covered and you're just there praying to your God. And the only thing that you may be allowed to do is to groan, the action of groaning, until that moment of being taken up in the spiritual of adoption comes. So it is our Mercy Seat that we're introduced to and connected to the concept of murmuring and groaning. We are placed into a process of drilling. So the drilling, oh, this is good. The drilling would happen as you sit. You would literally step. You actually be stripped of your name for that moment, and you become a number. And as you breathe in and out, right? Literally is the breath that begins the groaning. And whilst we would like to think of God very much from an intellectual cognitive thing, is actually much lower in the gut, or worse yet, in the groin, according to Rex Netherford. So you go. So the idea is that the breathing itself is what invokes that sense of connection to your grounding, and then that leaves you open for spiritual, for education and edification and utterances. And the various devices that are used include ideas around what is the alphabet. So the idea of schools, from our idea of when we went to school, we have incorporated in the context of how we would introduce this idea of murmuring and groaning. So you will have people go or B, C, D, or we could use numbers as well, right? And that idea is to keep you, to ground you, to just take out all the distractions and to bring you into a sense of connecting with your breath, with your gut, and your gut with your spirit. I have a very sensitive phone, so as we begin to develop and we learn about these different languages, and we begin to take in and have that spirit of adoption indwell within us, then we begin to understand and see and sense where we are going spiritually, because part of the recognition of where you're traveling spiritually has to do with the understanding of different languages. Now, I heard the Queen Mother talk about the various languages that are different nations that we recognize, and the one that it is we recognize it is through song. So we have a song for India, and then we have a song for various parts of Africa. We have a song for Arabia, right? And for China, right? And by acknowledging these songs as we travel, we recognize where we are spiritually, we ground ourselves spiritually, and then we can move off from there to the next space within the spirit. So the various utterances, like I said, A, B, C, or the different use of different words. So either just Chinese, cha-ching, chang, chang, or there is a ning, 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 which gives you a sense of, everybody knows. So this knowing is here, we don't have to wait for the knowledge to turn up. It's here, it's right here. So we want to embrace that these things we have come with. that our ancestors have embodied us with, that it is our DNA, and we need to give it full access through our spiritual practice. So where we might think of ourselves in the context of what could be a church setting, and we feel ourselves being transported to another realm, it doesn't ever feel like if it's part of mass hysteria. It feels very tangible, it feels very real, and especially when we have instances of people who have been transformed by healing miraculously, or transformed to literacy from illiteracy, or get messages of consolation, or find out where you left your money or where the person left the money. Those miraculous things, it can be from mass hysteria, right? So I was going to try to show you one more video, but I'm not sure if it's going to work. So we talked about identifying with nation sounds. I can try to show this later. So what I wanted to do in this instance is to just conclude by saying, for us, sound and music is just one of the many different layers that are used in the connection, the transference, and the activation of our space. For us to travel into the space, into that dimension spiritually, into the reality that is set up for us, for healing, for divine messaging, for activating of the various elements that we have been using and are blessed. That continuum between past and present, between spiritual and carnal, I should say past, present, and future, because some of us are able to prophesy based on what comes to us, between what is the ancestral or connection to the ground and who we come with, and the divine, what comes to us from celestial spaces. All those fluidities, all those possibilities, all those realities exist, alive and present within our spiritual practice. When induction becomes language and makes road. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. Please join me in giving them a hand of applause again. I invite all of the panelists to sit on the stage. Yeah, they've given us quite a bit to think about, to process, to query from the various vantage points of which you sit and stand and believe. So I open the floor to any of you for your questions, your comments that you may have for any of the panelists. Yes, please introduce yourself if you don't mind, and then go ahead. Yes, stand. Yes, to the mic, please, because we are recording. And then if you wish, you could just line up and then we would just take the question from there. There you go. And hopefully we could get the sound sorted over lunch, because it is a pity to not hear it, because the magic is in the sound. It's the sonic. And when we think about the various Africana traditions, the spiritualities within the African diaspora, sound is very important. Sound, the sonic scape is the way in which the medicine is transferred. It's the way that it's translated. And when the drums no longer became available for our ancestors to play, our voices became what carried that sound. Our bodies are what carried that sound, hitting our legs, our chest, our arms, recognizing the various pitch of our voices. And so what we see in that, this kind of enactment of spiritual Baptist is the way that a restriction and a prohibition opened up a new formality, a new means of communicating with the divine, and expanded the various ways of which we begin to tap into source, and tapping into source through sound that is emitted from our voices and our bodies. I believe that it's on now. Yes. And I turn to you. Thank you.
Hi, morning, everyone. My name is Mikhael, and I have a question for Mr. Hunt specifically, but anybody on the panel can also chime in to help out. What is the significance and the intention of the mourning period and the mercy seat, et cetera, 3 months, 6 months, or so that you mentioned, and how does it actually help you in terms of your enlightenment and your enrichment going forward?
You should ask the pointers in the room, but anyhow, it's on, sir. Hello, hello, hello. Come on. Thank you. So for. Hello? Okay. So for those of us who are involved in spiritual matters, both mercy seat and mourning are what we call accelerated. We accelerate our connection to the processes. We would like to think that a person is inspired to or has a sense that they need to go. So we don't like recruit, like not go over there. So once you have that inspiration, that calling, and it is verified by the members of the church or the leaders of the church, you'll be invited to take what we call mercy seat. Or in the other case, where you do have either a dream or a sense or indication that you want to mourn, you will go to a dedicated person for whom that is their gift, usually a pointer or a leader. And they would also have to verify that this is something that they quote unquote see or sense for themselves. Once that is established, then the ritual of mercy seat, in the case of baptism, or the ritual of preparation for mourning is established. And like I said, it pretty much is left up to the determination of the leader to determine. I mean, now with technology or with modern age, people like to think they can go in today and get baptized tomorrow. But we have a saying, right? You don't want to go down a dry sin and come back out a wet sin. So the idea of going on mercy seat is actually to really divest itself of all the distractions, of all the things that could block your full immersion into the spirit, so that once you go down, that you will come up in full receipt of it. So like I said, for mercy seat, it could be like 6 weeks, a year. Well, no, not always a year, but sometimes. Some nuts hard to crack. But in other cases, for mourning, you usually hear diviners say, maybe you need to start working 2 or 3 days before, or take the night off and have a good morning sleep. Maybe do some cleansing, do some baths in preparation for mourning. And then the mourning itself could also very fluid. You could take 3 days, 4 days, 7 days, 9 days, 14 days, 21 days, 40. Some people have gone 40 days. But in that particular, you're well taken care of. Whilst you are dealing with this, the spirit, your physical needs are taken care of by a dedicated staff who are also called to act in the morning room to help you deal with your physical needs whilst you walk into the spirit. I hope that answers your question. Interested? Any other questions? Yes, please. You want to come to the mic?
Yes.
Hello, and I just want to thank everybody. I really enjoying, yeah, that's a good word, enjoying the learning. And this question is to John. It's not really a question, it's a clarification. And I wrote it down. Aspects of the technology. I was wondering if I heard right. Could you speak to that?
Well, I mean, there are different ways. I think there's a way in which when other people talk about, and I'm also have to be careful that, because I have colleagues in the room and may not agree with the word technology. So I have to look carefully. But when I use the word technology, because for us it's a tangible, visceral thing. It is not just something that you do esoterically and hope. We actually believe that if you are continually grounded in faith, and you're given these avenues to connect, when you use them, that the connection happens. So just like turn on a switch or turn on a machine, when we groan in the spirit, when we sing the song, when we begin to move in the spirit, we have a firm expectation that we will get answers. So for me, it becomes more of a science and technology rather than an art or something that's hit or miss. So I use technology in that way.
Hi, I actually have 3 questions. one is about circumcision. Is that an issue or not?
You want me to answer that now?
Yes, please. In a
No.
gentle manner.
No, well, for us, being circumcised or uncircumcised is not the issue. We're not concerned with issues of flesh. We're concerned with issues of the heart
Okay.
and of the spirit.
Okay, thank you. And the other one is in reference to Native Americans being acknowledged as part of the ancestry or ancestors. How does that work?
Well, what is wonderful about the spiritual Baptist faith is that we have a pantheon of ways to recognize. So, and what I find when I go to spiritual Baptist or services, depending on who we are paying homage to or who we are doing work for, we will acknowledge African, we will acknowledge Indian, we will acknowledge the Asiatics, and we also will acknowledge the Native American.
Okay,
Also within our iconography. So in some instances, the use of the smoke has that resonance. Use of certain plants, cassavas and stuff also has. And in other places, the idea of smoke and smoking also carries that resonance.
and the last question is, could you please give 3 recommendations of maybe like a variation of a service so that I can go and visit?
You mean you want to know where to go?
Yeah.
Well, this is Little Daniel Faith here. Their service are on Saturdays in Britons Hill. So you can speak to him. Mount Pisgah, well, probably one of our more popular churches, small churches. Their services are on Sundays at Samuel.
Not small.
When I say small, as compared to the 10,000 Granville, we are small, but we're only small in size. We are large in spirit, you understand? So Mount Pisgah is over here and they have their service on Sunday.
One more. 3 is-
Triumph Shelters also in Boers Land,
Okay,
Christchurch.
thank you.
Would you want to say something, sir? This is the Bishop Marlon Jones of the Mount Pisgah.
Good morning to all. I just want to give a little addition to the question that she asked about American Indians. When we mourn, we are open to the spiritual realm in totality. So we're not limited just to who we are as an African people. We are open to the spiritual realm. So it is possible for us to meet people from any dimension at all. Okay, thank you.
And if I can add to that, when we take our ancestry back, it is clear that we have those cross references within our DNA, right? So if you think about the fact that we have only been conquered by the Europeans since 1492, but that 8,000 years before, they were Taino, Kananaga, and Semi who crossed paths, who were living and hiding in places like Barbados, even when the colonizers were here, and possibly also integrated in our society without us being known. Then it's clear that it's not just a coincidence when those people turn up at our places. Yes, please.
My question probably is to the women. One of the things that you said is that the women quite often will dress in 19th century costume, but the men not. And I wondered about that, what the significance of that was, if there was one.
Well, I will start and then I will give over to the ladies. In my experience, looking at across the faiths, it seems that the women hold the tradition in their bodies. They feel quite secure and feel the currency of doing that. There are some ladies who will transcend that tradition, and that is okay. But for the majority of women, the idea of wearing head wraps, the idea of wearing clothes that are more modest, the idea of wearing clothes that are longer, seems to be the trend rather than the exception. I will hand over to the Queen Mother and the same one.
Yes, good afternoon again, and I would say dresses play an important role in all the spiritual faiths. There's this notion of modesty, notion of properly attire, and also this element as African people about regalness and so on. But it all depends on what you would say, era to era. Because in the 80s and 70s, you find the elders were more wear like polyester cotton, and they gather waist, and they pinafore apron. And you know, the dress goes based on rank or your position as well. Everyone, a baptism child would dress different, maybe with a 3-point kerchief tie. Then you will find a nurse will dress different. The nurse will have on their apron and their watch and different things. And the mothers, again, they dress with their head tie different. But in this modern age, when we find all these beautiful, you know, design and fabrics, all different types, so we call it pretty fabrics, and you got this element of more materialistic attitude. I want to look good, you feel a little old, you know, so it all depends on the era and how now the elders, as many of them has passed or shutting, how the younger generation see these things, because sometimes we hear the old people say, you wear, or if can the grease touch it, it burn, you know, you don't want nobody touch you, you can't sweat, because you know in Baptist is hyperventilation with the ecstatic songs and you know the spiritual manifestation. And then as well with men, you'll find it has a lot borrowings from Catholicism, the way how the Catholic priest dress, the way how the Anglican priest dress, in your supplice and your capes. So yeah, and then you'll find certain events, you wear your African grab, your boobas and dashikis, and you know, so it all depends on where you are at, your mindset, your leaders, what they allow, and so on. Yeah, because sometimes now I find a leader was scrolling, you have these lace fabric and the split so you can see the arm, and then sometimes some line. So there's fashion and all that now involved, but still an element of modesty and decency and decorum. Yeah, but in terms of mourning, we always say is like enacting death. Is like going down to the lower ground of sorrow, you know, and we talk about up from the grazy row and the rising on the third morning, and it has a lot of ritual elements, a lot of mystery surrounding the faith, and sometimes it is shedding secrecy and trade secrets. And they say, if you think that I am a soldier, come and see, come and see. And sometimes certain sacred rituals are not to be recorded or photographs taken of certain events, especially when it comes to mourning and the banning rituals and certain things. Pointers don't allow you to photograph or do videos and stuff, because it's a very sacred practice, and it's like a prayer and fast, where you go for a certain amount of days, you know, to what we say, to walk and talk with the Lord, or to take a closer walk with God. So that's how mourning is kind of seen. And repentance, mercy seat, is like when you say, well, I want to accept Christ as my personal savior for mercy. If a altar call is thrown out, and then you find for that 3 months, it's not only to go and sit there and tramp, but also to learn the rudiments of the faith. That 3 months, if you want to be a spiritual Baptist, you're going to baptize, they will tell you, well, come every Sunday, or how regular you could come for at least 3 months, unless it's an emergency. Some people need assistance urgently, and then they have some that have to come to learn the rudiments of the faith. You learn to pray, learn to sing, you learn to, you know, all the different synergies that involve in the faith.
I was just thinking about this as the Queen Mother was speaking. And there seems to be utility in protection when it comes to dress. So the protection of the head, the crown from being open, and also because women have portals through which bodies come, the protection of the loins. So I don't know if that's the functionality of the modesty, but certainly it's translated. We have certainly observed when a person is being manifesting what is considered an African energy, that all of a sudden the head tie falls off, the apron flies off. So it's just pretty much depending on how we recognize who is coming and what they're coming with. But the general rule is to protect the portals from what's the word? I try to find a word that doesn't sound
Uninvited.
from uninvited entry, right? That's better.
Yes, Margaret Gill. I am interested in hearing more, Irika, from you in particular, but Andrea as well as John can speak to. You talk a lot about healing, and I'm not sure what is being healed. Are you talking about let me ask you, because I wasn't sure. When I hear healing, I was thinking of individual, but I'm not hearing that expressed in the presentations of any of the presentations. But I hear the word healing a lot. And the second question is, John, or you mentioned the shut-ins, and I'm particularly interested in hearing how the spiritual Baptists, what your practices are in relation to the treatment of people who can no longer attend the services.
Yes, when we look at Afrocentric spirituality, and we look at in Afro-Christian narratives, one of the things that is very important is this whole aspect of physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And we have discussed about a difficult environment with hardship, struggle, genocide and the horrors of colonial slavery, the demoralization and so on. How a lot of people are fractured, and we talk about what's wrong with Black people, but we know it is from the rigors of the experiences that we have been through and that we are still facing up to today. And healing is a very important component within Afro spiritual tradition, even in terms of the strong belief in God, the creator, the universe, of vegetation, the herbs around us, and even this element within Christianity of laying of the hands, of anointing, all these different things are pertaining to healing. When we talk about faith and trust and being strong and holding on, what does that mean? So in terms of healing, and when we look at the word obia and so on, it all has to do with our traditional healing practices. And one of the things that, especially when it comes to word song and incantation, is this whole aspect of feeling better, to create comfort, to create solace, so the word healing comes in many different ways. And then we ask ourselves, what are we hoping for? What are we fighting for? What is the cause? And a lot of people say, I just have to pray. Pray make the darkest cloud withdraw. Pray climb the ladder Jacob saw. Pray exercise this faith and love and bring every blessing from above. So this aspect of healing comes within our spiritual practices in many ways, the conjurers. And we talk about the negative connotation and how some people don't like Baptists and things. But when you look on the side, they will call you, they're coming in the middle of the night, don't let nobody know me, you talk, and all these things, to the same spiritual Baptist or healer man or bush doctor for assistance. With with different maladies, different problems, whether it's home problems, social problems, psychological problems, spiritual problems. People need healing. And that's a fundamental point. So that's where the words, the songs, the liturgy, the praise, you know, this thing with salvation and deliverance and saving your soul and getting your soul right. I think that's where we put it, place it.
Just like to add that maybe it's not so widely recognized, but there are actual examples of physical healing from ailments, sometimes unexplained, unexplainable in terms of Western medical science that takes place within these spaces. And it's a very important role that the Baptist faith serves. And sometimes not just the emotional and the social healing that Irika would refer to, but actual physical healing of bodies, of people individually that takes place. I guess would be lumped under the general heading of supernatural healing. But I think that all positive faith-based practices have a vital role to play in this.
I just want to add that this rarely happens outside of the context of community. So it is a situation where it works better when you're around people who are actively connected to and intending to, and it actually sometimes works. It works more effectively and faster when you have a group of people who are united around the same intention. It rarely happens that you can do this in a room by yourself, although that's also a modality.
Thank you. My name is Denise Noel Dubic. We were told to say our names as well. It links, I want to ask a question that links to the three presentations, but also the three answers that just came at the individual level, the community level, and the overarching level, but particularly around the expectations of your religion, your faith practice in the context of where we are now. Particularly because, especially on COVID, everything was available to listen to. So the business of trauma and violence have come together in a very real way. And before that, people will talk about violence, particularly, well, I don't want to use a particular term, but my friends here will know, violence perpetrated against groups of us, either by virtue of our sex or by virtue of our race and so on. But more or less, the linkages are being made between the violence that is happening now in our communities and in our families to the trauma that was experienced then. And if that be true, and it probably is, I'm again wondering and asking you how you see yourselves positioned to I don't want to say to give us the answers, but I think a lot is on your shoulders. So it's a throw out to you to ask where you are you thinking of that? And is it a direction that you think that you really have to put some, well, I don't want to put some emphasis, I know it is spiritual, but I don't know whether we should all do that walk to get the answers, because the answers must be available to save us. Okay.
That's a lot. Well, the spiritual balance community, like I said, we're numerically not the largest, but we do have an abundance of faith. And one of the things I think, and I would invite my colleagues on the floor to say more if they want, is that we try to be the light, right? Try to be an example of what it means to live in this world, right? Because by doing so, we can encourage people to come and join us and be part of that movement in the light. But we do recognize, like you said, that post-traumatic enslaved syndrome or where everything's is symptomatic of things that continue to prop up almost in a pattern way in our society from time to time, especially when the society is under economic stress or stresses that they don't understand. So it is an opportunity for us to face those traumas personally, to show how we have transferred from that, and then invite other people to do the same. But it doesn't seem to be like a fast track. It is not an easy process. And we have a whole lot of distractions of instances where people will try to bypass those tracks to continue to function. So it is about connecting to the Spirit, Holy Spirit, and such energies to be guided as to how we can do that for ourselves and possibly do that for others. But to me, it's on a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure if some people in our communities are inspired to do wayside preaching, right? For specific purposes, to give out messages, and that works, but that also has to be done, I find, with the verification of the Spirit, because you could go today and you will get a wonderful response. And then if you didn't get the verification, you go the next day, you could be putting yourself in harm's way. So everything has to be done by inspiration or by direction. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything.
Okay. Just wanted to say that while I think it's a big ask for maybe any one church to accomplish that, I think the contribution of this church in this time and space is invaluable towards that path. I would think that you could not possibly be raised in a Caribbean society and not be affected negatively by the historical trauma of being told that you were less than, that you were not worthy of love, that by virtue of being born with a certain amount of melanin in your skin, that you could not possibly accomplish great things. It's in the spiritual spaces of churches like the Spiritual Baptist Church, where Black divinity is acknowledged. It's central to it, an awareness that you can walk closely with God, that each and every one of us is a child of God, that there is no shame in our history, in our past. It is in that setting that healing begins. I see it and I'm shocked by it. My children today, we're still living in a society where people equate beauty with lightness and the capacity for greatness based on where you happen to live or the amount of melanin or lack thereof that you were born with. And these are retentions that limit the development and the possibilities of individuals, but also whole societies. So centers of Black sacred spaces are very important to turn that lie on its head and to reinvigorate and to reassure. And I think to draw the children of this nation, indeed, the African diaspora, back to a reality of their selves, the fullness of their human potential. And it has to start with believing that they are worthy and understanding. And I think that churches like this are a very good place to start. We can't do it alone, but it's a very good place to start.
Hi, I'm Makosi Nayame Watua. I'm a Sangoma priestess. And Sangomas are people of dance and drum. So I'm like here, like, oh, this is where all the Sangomas are hiding in the Spiritual Baptist Church. So I just have like comments based on, because the tradition is out of South Africa, is a Northern Bantu tradition, but most people migrated to South Africa. So it's really indigenous in its practice and keeping up the practices. And I don't know if you ever heard of Krino Mutwa, but he's like the great Sanusi of Sangomas. And before I continue just to answer the question that just came up, mourning is a way of healing, of going back, of healing your ancestral lineage of seeing where the trauma occurred, you know, healing in the spirit realm and then coming forward. So it's really not on the church itself. People need to take responsibility for themselves. You need to go in and heal your own lineage, your own bloodline, and come back with that healing so that your children and the future generation does not have to experience what you would have, right? So one of the things that stood out to me was, don't look to man, look to spirit. For when you're taught by spirit, you're well taught. And that's one of the things that is the foundation of our practice. Like during initiations, one of the most difficult initiations there is that nobody teaches you anything. Like your spirit needs to come and tell you your name. The same thing, you just lose your name, you're nameless until spirit comes and tells you your name. When I saw the prophets, we call them prophets, but when I saw the blue robes, that's exactly what the prophets wear in our tradition. Still up to today, they work more with water and like prophesying and healing with herbs, you know, pray, the same smoke, prophesying, same traveling, which is which y'all call morning, or like you get into trance, you go into, you know, you dance together, you drum, and that takes you into trance where you can communicate with spirit and bring back the messages from spirit. So if like in our tradition, if you see somebody going into trance, like everybody stops what they're doing, you're drumming, and then you're waiting for the message that spirit gives you to come back with, to share. What's also similar is like ringing of the bells. You said up from the ground, like you're raising the Umbellini, you're raising that energy. You first need to really ground down and connect your root chakra and heal the lower chakras up, and then you come up where then you are, you know, you have your spiritual head, you're more connected to spirit. And the same trance state, they do ground markings with the prophets. You mentioned seeing Indians in our tradition. When we see Indians, it also represents something. Lots of singing, same sacrifice, offering of grains, honey, more along the prophet end, the prophet side of this tradition. And you mentioned long services, it's the same. Like if somebody's in trance, you can't just say, okay, well, you know, service finishes at 12, let's go. You have to allow the person to process and, you know, get whatever message is coming through. And you mentioned finding missing objects. That's something that is the test in our tradition as well. We call it infilo. You have to be so connected to spirit that you need to be able to find, the spirit needs to be able to tell you, and you need to be able to hear what is missing. And that also ties into your own healing, because during the whole initiation process, you're finding what is missing, what's the issue, what's the root problem, because most, if not all people who initiate come ill. Nobody just walks in and says they want to initiate, they are ill. And it's confirmed by your Baba or the diviner first. And in South Africa, at the temple I went to, it's known that we wear skirts. So like some parts of the land, they forbid sangomas to come. And the way they do it is to say, like if you're wearing the pants, you can go, because they know that if you're wearing the pants, you're not sangoma. So it's like they're really trying to take over the land. And it's similar also where y'all have colors of robes and belts, and we have ropes and, you know, they had wraps. And so I just see that how it has come over the waters all the way up to Barbados, and see all the similarities within this tradition. So I just wanted to share. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. My name is Sonia Williams, and I wanted to ask you a question. And I also wanted to say something about the activation and the transformation. As a woman who goes into a lot of spiritual places, for example, when I am sometimes the spirit just hits you. So you don't even know that you're being taken by the spirit. But I've actually been in a service where I could actually feel the electricity coming from the earth. And I could see when the electricity touched somebody else in the room, like the person right in front of me. And I'm saying that this thing about technology, about this particular technology and what we're actually doing when we embody and we move, that there is something happening between the very land. And today you talked about coming to this land, to touch this land, to do something. And there is this sense then that it is not just us in the room, or even, but it is something more, even the presence of the spirit, but the presence of the earth and the elements, the water, the fire burning, all of this is all part of that activation. And I've had it in more than one modality, this thing of spirit. I even have it sometimes, like I was doing a production, helping a student recently, and a new drummer came in. I went, "Patats," and I went, boom. And I was like, what the bird, you know? So anyway, who is this drummer, you know? So I am even in the instrument speaking to us through particular hands. So that's it. But what I want to really want you to talk about in some way is, how do these different modalities come together? How do you work as Rastafari and as spiritual Baptist, a Rastafari and Orisha? You know, so there's these different ways that we are not one person. I am that. And every church I enter, the priest, whether it's Catholic, Anglican, has asked me who you is because of the energy that I carry. So I'm wondering then about and you know, this discussion for me about how does an Anglican then work in a spiritual Baptist, and how does these modalities come together? For your insight on that.
I was encouraging my brother to give his vision, but it's my experience and observation that yes, there are these different quote unquote doors through, or portals through which we enter the spirit. So some are entered through Christianity, or some are entered through the various other Christian faiths or other faiths. But at a particular level, once we go to that initiation, at a particular level, they don't seem to have that same importance once we begin to rise spiritually. So my experience I started off as an Anglican. I got to know myself as a spiritual Baptist, and now I'm experiencing other modalities which don't feel in conflict. I remember once when I was investigating IFA, because IFA was the rage in Trinidad. People were letting go of Shango and taking on IFA writ large, right? And they were, to me, in a sense, denying anything that happened after our ancestors left the continent in order to take on this thing. So I was having a bit of a thing with that. So a colleague of mine got me in touch with an IFA practitioner in Nigeria who didn't seem to have the same problem that I was seeing other people. They didn't have the same issue with the connecting to. So I asked him, so what is this issue around this, these various faiths not seeming to work together? He says, it's all vexation and vanity. Yes, the Ecclesiastes term, that the idea that there is difference is something that man conjures up in their head. That at a particular level, there is no difference. Or let's put it like this, that spirit doesn't recognize difference in that way. But of course, we're dealing with people in communities, and different communities have different quote styles or different, oops, I got the bishop to stand up again. But people are experiencing these different things, and they're valid for the spaces that they come from, right? So they're valid. But who are we in relation to these spaces? Who are we in relation to this, and how do we want to function in these spaces? I do not want to conflict with my Sangoma brother or my Dagara brother or my Santeria brother, but I want to be able to move on my own path. So we have to find out that balance. But from a existential perspective, spirit is spirit. When you ask spiritual questions, say, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you mean. that don't make no sense to me, right? God is God, what? God, Olodumare, all that. Same thing, same person. Yes. I want to give it to the bishop. Oh, you wanted to say something? Sorry, sorry.
Yes, these discussions, as I said in my preamble, is very multi-dynamic and complex. And, you know, I always say everything starts in the mind. And I'm sure there are bishops in the room that know that when you're dealing with the congregants or members of the community, sometimes you ask, who's the real church goer? Or what is your typical member like? Is it someone that is ill? Is it someone that is in need of help? And is it someone that just loves to go to church or just loves to support the faith? But many will tell you that sometimes they get members who just come to church because they have a problem, or who just come to church because they have some going through a valley situation. But, you know, I think that people are looking for salvation. People are looking for deliverance. And, you know, when we talk about the Bible, which is one of the main sacred texts used to validate all the various positions that spiritual Baptists and the rituals that they have. But I would say that people are searching for something that is within them. That divinity is within you. And that's where they say reach out. And God is our help in time of trouble. You know, the telephone line is always open. So I find that spiritual Baptists and other faith systems, you know, we are not separated. Like for me, I straddle various faith systems, you know, so like Rastafari, spiritual Baptist, Orisha, there's good in all. There's something to learn in everything. So it's not a conflict for me, especially when you know where your God is and who is your God. So sometimes the confusion is in your mind and within yourself, but you just need to harness it. Yeah, Bishop Marlon.
Yeah, just one. I think that in terms of Afro-tradition practices, Afro-traditional spiritual practices, there's more similarity than difference. And I think that while everyone is walking this earth on their own mission and on their own path, not everybody's path is going to be identical. I think if the spirit is yearning just for this oneness with the source, I think persons who are searching do know that there's only one source. And as Kamal would have said, he was referencing the Caribbean, but like the Caribbean, in I think many of these Afro traditions, the unity is submarine. The source, there's only one. And whatever path you're walking towards it, as long as you're walking towards that source, you will find similarity, you will find a complementarity. So your path isn't necessarily going to be always on one road. Sometimes you may switch back and forth, but once you're working and heading towards that one source, you will find that unity. The unity is submarine.
Good afternoon once again. I thought that the last word that, let me say, Mother Andrea used was key. There's only one source. And as a spiritual Baptist practitioner, we have chants, we have doctrine, we have singing, that might be Anglicanized or from a Methodist tradition or Catholic tradition. We have adoption as part, we create an energy within this space. But let me say this. I've been to Anglican churches and left full of current. I've been to Adventist churches and left full of current. I've been to Pentecostal churches and left full of current. And one of the things that I think that we need to understand, music is universal language. And it is possible and very possible for some person in any space, in any church, let me say some person in the Anglican tradition, because we sing like a song like Jerusalem, my happy home. And a spiritual Baptist can be lost in the song and actually go to a spiritual place called Jerusalem. The same thing can happen to some person in the Anglican church as well. It is because of what we practice and how we go after what we do that we would realize that I've been there. The other person might not, but spiritually they have transcended that space. So it is not that we own something exclusively. It is what we practice that makes the difference. Thank you.
Close, but we are streaming live and we have some questions, two of which I'll share to the panelists and whomever want to take them. This person is signing in from Nevis and wants to know, was hoping to hear a response on the question of what happens around the visitation of the homebound. Yeah. Yeah. And then the other question is coming in from Wendell Roberts. I've heard some faiths in Guyana refer to their entry, our spirit. Sometimes the entry has gender, name, and nationality. How can you explain this? So those are last two questions. We have a faithist in the room. Yeah, so feel free, because if there's knowledge in the room, we know that it doesn't always sit at the head table, so feel free as.
I think part of our challenge and also our joy as a spiritual Baptist community is that we have a large aging community. And what I have experienced and observed is that the community rallies themselves around the aged people. So in certain instances, members of a community, family or not family, might elect to move in with that person to help them out with their daily lives. And it's kind of symbiotic, so that if a person has a property and a looking for a place to stay, then the relationship is formed. Some of those relationships would have been formed before from there being a member of the church, but it becomes strengthened when they do things like that. So we have elderly people cohabitating together, people staying with them, or members of the various communities looking out for their elderly. So instead of maybe them coming to church, they would have service for them at their churches. So these are some of the things that I have observed and seen that doesn't seem to have that issue, that problem from a general perspective. And this sharing is usually welcome because we do think of each other as family, even with the dysfunction sometimes, the idea of family exists. And I really want to leave the last question about the faithists to the representative of the Georgia faiths.
Hi, good afternoon, and it's a privilege to be in such a setting. I don't know if you guys could feel the vibration in the room, but there is an air of community, an air of open minds, and there's an air of exploration of our spirituality. Well, as Bishop Marlon would have indicated, spirit does not know time, boundary. We as humans in our learning, we attribute boundary, space, time, and we bring our tremors into our spiritual experiences. And as you see me here, when I transcend to a spiritual realm, I take on the same identity of who I am to make you comfortable. So the question with regards to when the spirit makes manifestation, if it could be male or female, first and foremost, we are androgynous. So in our DNA, we gather some from our mothers, we gather some from our fathers. In the manifestation of that, it depends on who the person is or who the individual is, if it be a male ancestor or a female ancestor, you will see them as they are, because the body is not who we are. The spirit is who we are. And the spirit can make manifestation in gender form as the environment permits. So I hope that answers the question.
Wow, so much here, but bellies need to be filled, and there is a time to then take a break, and then we're going to, for those who are having lunch with us, there's an opportunity to eat in the back in the cafeteria. Yes, in the cafeteria, and then we will reconvene. I invite you though, before we leave, as you're thinking about, walking through this really majestic space, pick off your shoes and feel the earth, let your feet really hit the soil. There are spaces for you to walk and to just be in contemplation after you eat or as you're walking over. Just really use the moment to take in the space and the recognition that we've all been called here in community. Thanking you all for your presence here in this morning session. I invite you now all to stand as we lead out in song. You've been sitting a long time. So really allowing yourself to find yourself as they raise a trumpet. All the way to Africa.